and then they go to Washington for a bailout. I think there should be a debate at the presidential level in this country about why we don't move the burden of our tax system to things we like the least and dislike the most, so we can free human labor from any federal income taxation, at least up to $100,000 a year. And so we can fund so many things that we need that are not being met. Reverse U.S. policy in the Middle East. There's a real taboo for you. First of all, on Iraq, they just don't want to react to the reality that we cannot militarily continue to occupy Iraq without expecting the Iraqis to fight back. What do you think they do if the shoe was on the other foot? And just like if there was a foreign military occupation of Texas, we might presume that Texans would fight back constantly, year after year. And that's what's going to happen. And dividing and ruling by favoring one sect after another by the Bush regime increases sectarian fighting. We've got to get out of that country. That's our bargaining chip. We take 6 months. The Army couldn't even get out logistically in less than 6 months. With a negotiated withdrawal, so that the three sectarian groups, Kurds, Shiites, Sunnis, can develop their own autonomy within a unified Iraq, which they worked out way back in the 1950s. These people have been around for longer than we have, you know. This goes back to ancient Mesopotamia. The way we patronize them, why we provoke them, supporting some criminal gangs there, and passing out $100 bills here. Do you know $9 billion of U.S. money when we invaded Iraq was unaccounted for? The Pentagon auditors cannot tell the Government Accountability Office of the U.S. Congress where that money went. Where do you think it went? I mean, they were having huge cargo planes with $100 bills. You have UN-sponsored elections in the 6-month or so period. Continue humanitarian aid, bring the soldiers back home, bring the oil companies back home, give them back their country, give them back their oil, and have peacekeepers from nearby Islamic countries for the time being. We have to recognize that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is resolvable if we would stand behind, if we would stand behind the Israeli peace movement and the Palestinian peace movement who have been negotiating conflict resolution for years. The best newspaper in Israel, Haaretz, had a poll the other day, March 1st, that said that 64% of the Israelis want negotiations for a ceasefire with Hamas. 28% opposed. We're not getting that kind of information here in our newspaper. The Israeli peace movement is made up of former generals, security officials, mayors, members of the Knesset, leading intellectuals, soldiers who refuse to fight in the West Bank and Gaza, called refuseniks, said they'll defend Israel at the 67 borders. They have never had a hearing on Capitol Hill. We urge the Congress and public opinion in this country to demand that there be an extensive public hearing where the Israeli and Palestinian peace movement leaders come and lay out the resolution of that conflict, which is producing so many radiating adverse consequences for that part of the world as well as for our own security. It's not surprising the majority of Israelis and Palestinians want a two-state solution. Of course, when there is a sudden bloodshed, it slips. But over the time, the polls have shown that's what both peoples want. We want to repeal the Taft-Hartley anti-union law of 1947. That's off the table. Why, the Democrats can't even utter the words, repeal Taft-Hartley. I have challenged them now for years. And yet, that is the albatross around the neck of American labor. And that's what keeps so much of our workforce that wants to engage in collective bargaining from being able to form a union. It is the most anti-union law in the Western world. 1947. Why don't we have a discussion on that one? That taboo. And then we have to put an end to ballot access obstructionism. We need one federal standard for candidates running for federal office. As well as working to end corporate personhood. Corporations are not human beings. They don't vote, they don't have children, they don't die in Iraq. The employees are human beings, obviously, but the corporate entity should never be given equal constitutional rights with real human beings, because you cannot have equal justice under law between a human being and General Motors or Exxon that can be in 1,000 places at once around the world, pitting governments and pitting states against one another, buying and renting politicians, going into bankruptcy, and still paying top value for their executives, called retention bonuses, getting rid of their labor contracts when they go bankrupt, getting rid of their tort claimants when they go bankrupt. How did we ever get into this mess? I'll tell you how. No legislature legislated equality between big corporations and human beings. It was all done by the courts, by the Supreme Court, starting in 1886. So the courts, in effect, destroyed the semblance of equal protection under law, because there is no way even an individual billionaire can approximate the power juggernaut of these large corporations and their control over technology, capital, and labor. Let's have a discussion on that. There are already groups that are meeting in small numbers around the country discussing what's called an end to corporate personhood. That is, we have to subordinate the corporate entity to the sovereignty of the people. Right now, it is the reverse. The sovereignty of the people is subordinated to the sovereignty of giant multinational corporations. That's not what was designed in our Constitution.